Good morning, and thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. And because this is home of my organization, the Boston area. IPPNW was founded in 1962 under the name of Physicians for Social Responsibility in the United States and by doctors who worked here in the Boston area. So this is my IPPNW home also, besides having a home with my relative in Maryland. And one thing I discovered the other day when I visited a doctor friend here was interesting. My friend, and he's now the co-president of IPPNW International, Dr. Ira Helfand, he gave his first talk to Rotary here in Milford in the 70s to this, probably this must have been this Rotary Club that time.
Wow. Would that be Dr. Helfand's son? He has a son named, anybody remember Dr. Helfand?
Dr. Ira Helfand. No, it's Ira. It's the Dr. Helfand must have been from this area,
yes.
And his son gave the talk.
Yeah.
His son is an internist like I am.
Yeah. Yes. Wow.
So.
My dentist, I'm sorry. I didn't believe in Novocaine.
So, having said that, we're going right into the issue, which seems to be a very abstract topic. Somebody talking about nuclear weapons, nuclear disarmament, and I've been working on this on a literally pretty much daily basis for a long time now, and I show you why. This is called 10 seconds. That's all it takes. Yeah. Okay, so next slide. If we talk about nuclear weapons, it seems that it's a topic from the 80s. It's out of sight. It's not in the newspapers very much. It's not in your newspapers. It's not very much in our newspapers. What is the situation? I hope you can read it. The situation today, even before the crisis of Ukraine, which has significantly worsened the relationship between Russia and the Western European countries, as you know, is that Obama, who received the Nobel Peace Prize for his speak and his ambitions and thought to abolish nuclear weapons eventually, has actually promised to invest in the modernization, I would call it new nuclear armament, at a size of many billions of US dollars that he promised to invest in the modernization of nuclear weapons. Russia, at the same time, Putin has plans to renew the whole nuclear arsenal. Those decisions had been taken before the Ukraine crisis. He actually wants to modernize everything he has related to nuclear weapons, new intercontinental ballistic missiles, new nuclear submarines, new bombers. So that is very scary. When we talk about nuclear weapons, we often tend to talk about what George Bush once called rogue states. But in fact, if you see that 93% of the nuclear weapons are under possession of Russia and the United States, it really is a topic that comes back to our own societies. Me as a German, as a NATO member closely related to the United States, I would always say us, meaning because I think we sit in the same boat, the United States and Germany, in a way. Next slide, please. So just to give you an idea what's happening in Germany, Germany has nuclear weapons, US nuclear weapons based in Germany. There is a modernization program which is discussed to extend or to renew the nuclear bombs in Germany so that they will last until 2050. And in the international discussion, I'm participating in being a representative of IPPNW at United Nations, or if I go to countries like North Korea, Russia, or whatever. The question that comes up is, you consider yourself a non-nuclear weapon state, Germany, but why do you have nuclear weapons based on your soil? So that's a national debate we have in Germany, just to illustrate that. Next slide, please. So there are 180 American nuclear weapons based in Europe today, and one of the projects we work in Europe is to request the removal of the United States nuclear weapons, because militarily they don't play a role. It is a political decision to have them. We don't want to get, we could, if you have asked questions related to that, we can go into all the topics I'm raising. Next slide, please. The problem that I see is, and that is a very fundamental question the United States primarily or foremost has to ask itself, is there are 40 countries on the planet right now who could technically develop nuclear weapons in a very short period of time. To give you one example, Japan, for example, which is a non-nuclear weapon state, has all technological capabilities to develop nuclear weapons. It's really only a political decision not to do it. With other countries, the things get more complicated, but it's not only Iran and North Korea we are talking about. There are other countries, Saudi Arabia, maybe Algeria had nuclear programs and all this kind of stuff. So it's a very complicated question. It then comes to the question, do we not all have to give up the nuclear capability because it's a multipolar world? I don't think it's realistic that some countries will be able to keep nuclear weapons and that others will not attain them eventually. So that is one of the big questions behind it. Next question. And in fact, it's not only a political or moral question we are talking about. There have been interesting resolutions and interesting agreements made already. I don't know if you're aware of the fact that the very first resolution at the United Nations in 1946 already talked about the need to abolish nuclear weapons. I find that very interesting. And that is something, whenever I give a talk, I say, if you don't remember anything I'm saying, this is what you have to remember. We talk sometimes about the non-proliferation treaty. That is the reason why we say Iran does not have the right to produce, buy, or develop nuclear weapons, which is right. That's part of this treaty. But in this treaty, it also says the nuclear weapon states at that time, which was the United States of America, the Soviet Union, and Great Britain, and later France and China joined, so the P5 nuclear weapon states, they promised under Article 6 to eventually abolish their nuclear arsenal. Not only to diminish and reduce, but to eventually abolish. And I find that's very important, because I can tell you, if I talk to a politician from Iran, they know that our countries have an obligation to abolish nuclear weapons. What the contract does not say is there's no timeline, and it doesn't give the specifics. So that's the reason why this has not happened. And I would say it's a pretext to keep the nuclear arsenals in our countries. Next slide, please. So we swip that, we take that. That's only the wording of it. So for me, I'm a doctor. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a politician. I'm a doctor. For me, it's a humanitarian question. And the reason why I'm working for it is because I know and I deeply feel the connection that this is not an abstract topic. Nuclear weapons are not a political bargain chip as they are presented. They are a real threat because there are thousands of nuclear weapons today on high alert. They could be used at any minute. I have 20 minutes for this talk now. 20 minutes is about the time an American or a Russian intercontinental ballistic missile would need to make it across the ocean. I don't think that the United States government has any any intention to use it on purpose. But I know, and there has just been a new book out by Eric Schlosser, an American journalist, it's called Command and Control, who talked about all the accidents, or almost accidents. I am very suspicious, something like Fukushima, where we never thought something like that could happen. If that happened with nuclear weapons, the history, if that happened with a Russian nuclear intercontinental ballistic missile, the history of this part of the United States would be gone in 20 minutes. When we think of the only images we really have is the Hiroshima event. And I can frankly tell you, for me as a European, I also, although I've been working on this topic for such a long time, I could never really emotionally relate to Japan. It's an historic event. It was a long time ago. The Japanese are culturally different. I can more relate to you as US citizens here than I can relate. I can see myself in Japan. What happened there? It's here. There were 150,000 deaths on a nice day like this one here on August 8th. And the first time I went to Hiroshima myself, that was only 2 years ago. When I went to the Peace Museum, I read a story about a father who used to pick up his daughter every day at lunchtime at the bus station. And on August 6th, his daughter she didn't come. And for years, he went to the same bus station every day and wait for his daughter. So I have a daughter who's 14 years old. And that was the moment where I really thought, I could relate to it, and I thought, this man, that could be me. And what happens here, that could happen to us, that could be us. And that's my personal drive to stay engaged, because I know there's a Wolke. On the sky, there's a gray, what do you call it? No, I'm looking for the word. A cloud. There's a gray cloud on the sky. Many of us don't see it, but it's there, I can tell you. Next slide, please. So, why get engaged? I took off the physicians because, preventing nuclear war is a medical imperative for me. That's my personal conviction. Yeah, the reason is that nuclear explosions would cause a nuclear winter. I'm going to talk a couple of minutes about that in a minute. That's a term that was used in the 80s. Now we better understand what that actually means. Yeah. And that's the point. There would be no regional nuclear war today anymore, which could be contained. There would be no Hiroshima, because the bombs of Hiroshima, compared to modern nuclear weapons, they are Stone Age. It has absolutely nothing to do with the capacity of destruction of a modern nuclear bomb. It's 1,000 times more. And it would not stay in the area. So it would have a major regional and even global impact. Next slide. So this is Ira Halfin, how he looks now. He looked younger in the 70s. I met him yesterday. Yeah, I met him yesterday. He lives in Northampton, Leeds. He made a study which is on the table. It's called Nuclear Famine, 2 billion people at risk. Next slide, please. What he did is he worked together with Alan Roebuck, who's a climate change expert, and they worked on the scenario. What would be the climate impact and the humanitarian impact of a possible use of nuclear weapons? What would be a likely scenario? Would be India and Pakistan. Yeah, it is possible that there would be use on purpose, because there's tensions about the two countries are so strong. So what would we have? We would get, in case of a use of 100 nuclear weapons, millions of fatalities right away, extensive radio fallout in the whole region, but also global climate effects lasting a decade or more. Next slide, please. So how do we know that? We know that's what we know. Yeah, we know that's what we know from Hiroshima. They ignite fires that burn whole cities. It's soot lifted high in the atmosphere. The amount of light would decrease, and large drops in surface temperature. There's a drops in surface temperature. So this demonstrates it in growing seizing. Next slide, please. For the U.S., North America, the rainfall that you would get minus 20%. Though they're all projections that can be made based on scientific data we have today. Next slide, please. Change in precipitation. So what would that lead to? It would lead to an enormous decrease of harvest. Yeah, we would have corn and maize that would be reduced down to 20% less in the average of 10 years. And that would be a major factor because we don't store the food we use, the grain we use. We have very little capacity worldwide. And if it comes to poor societies, next slide, please. Oh, that's the basis from what we know. There was in 1815, I don't know if anyone has heard about that incident. There was a Tambora volcano, I think that was in Indonesia, and it affected the harvest in the United States very dramatically. The average drop of temperature was only minus 7 degrees Celsius, but it differed very much. So what happened was there were freezing days in July, so the whole harvest that would all be gone because of the freezing cold. Next slide. Yeah, next slide, we skipped that. Yeah. So the impact on agriculture would be a decline in available food. We might be able to manage somehow in the Western societies, even with a certain increase of food prices. But you can imagine that for all the many people in the southern, on the global south, who have difficulties making a living anyway, that they would terribly affected by the decline in food. Next slide. So if you see that about 2,000 calories is a minimal daily requirement, we assume that 1 billion people already live below this level of daily intake, and you can imagine the dramatic impact climate change would have. Next slide, please. The latest study we did on China, which are and I don't know if you're aware that many areas we see the nice skyscrapers on TV, but many parts in China are very poor, and so there would be a dramatic impact on China too. Next slide. Not talking about the diseases that would the plague, cholera, malaria, typhus, a disease that would break out and cause additional problems. Next slide. Next one. You see, it's not only, I mean, I talked a bit more about the United States here. There are other countries who are involved in nuclear armament. You see France, Great Britain, Israel is a very big problem. How do we integrate Israel in the disarmament discussion and disarmament progress? Pakistan, India, North Korea, a country where I've been to as well. A lot of problems, but okay, next slide. That's what we want to achieve, the world as a nuclear weapon-free zone. And actually what is interesting, I'm coming to the end soon, I think, is that there are already a lot of agreements on nuclear weapon-free zones on the global south. That's pretty interesting. We think that the whole world is stuck with nuclear weapons, but there are agreements on the global south, so we can work on that. Next slide. Yeah, and I think that's the last one I want to show you. That's the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons. That's been our attempt as physicians to go beyond a physicians network, because we can't change it by ourselves. We need a broader approach. I think this is in the middle, in the center of society. This is not a political topic of the political left. It affects all of us. It should be a topic for all of us. And we have been able to integrate a lot of groups. The securing our survival, that's a document we made together with lawyers and physicists, because nuclear disarmament it needs the humanitarian, the moral dimension, but it needs the technical dimension to have a verifiable process of disarmament. I could not contribute to that because that's not my field, but physicists know about it, so they worked on it. And it's a legal question because, of course, it has to be multilateral, and that's a job for the lawyers. We presented a draft for a convention how to abolish nuclear weapons, which I think is one of the greatest achievements. It was mainly written by my roommate when I studied in med school in Boston in 1999. She would never talk to me because from the morning till late night she would work on the book. So I was present, I was there while she was working on it. I think it's a United Nations document today. It's a very interesting piece of paper as a discussion paper. And I think Rotary, who has done a great job with trying to eliminate polio over so many years, which I think you deserve a great applause from humanity for your activities. Rotary could also play a role in showing that the nuclear disarmament is something that affects everyone. And yeah, I know that Rotary is interested in peace, and I would be more than happy to continue on all levels possible collaboration with Rotary. And I make a break now, and I'm happy for any questions. You can ask me everything you want to ask me. Thank you very much.